Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So let us now continue with the next topic on the with the sutras here. The next thing we're going to have a look at is the idea of impermanence, or anicca in Pali. And what you find in the Anguttara Nikaya, the numerical discourses, you find quite a large number of suttas that talk about Aniccasannā, perception of impermanence. Often it doesn't say how it is done, it is saying that you do the perception of impermanence, and sometimes it is obvious what you have to do. But then there are a few sutras that talk about this in a little bit more detail, and so I want to discuss this idea in a bit more detail. It's a very powerful perception, and that's why it is talked about a lot. It manifests in many different ways. So, for example, Aniccasaññā, the contemplation of death, is really just one aspect of Aniccasaññā. Contemplation of everything that is dear and pleasing to me must become otherwise and must be separated from me. That's also an aspect of Aniccasaññā. The contemplation of the five khandas is an aspect of Aniccasaññā. That's obviously a very profound part of it. So you can see how a lot of things revolve around this. And so we need to kind of try to establish a framework for how we can develop this idea. This idea is not something you just do in your meditation. It's something you can do at any time during the day. It's one of those general contemplations as well as a profound meditation. It kind of encompasses almost everything on the Buddhist path. So it's part of right effort in terms of how you contemplate things, and it's also part of the meditation experience itself, the satipatthana, etc., etc. So let us, there's a couple of suttas I want to look at. The first one is very short and simple, and the other one is a bit longer, but also quite simple, actually. Nothing too profound. It is profound, but nothing too difficult. So the first one is from the Anguttara Nikaya, the numerical discourses, the 6th chapter, sutta number 102, called the Anavatthitasutta, which is here translated as Transience. And this is how Bhante translates this sutta. Mendicants, seeing 6 benefits is quite enough to establish a perception of impermanence in all conditions without qualification. So, so why should we establish this perception of impermanence? This is what this is about. What should we establish that perception in? It says here, in all conditions without qualification. This is Sabbe sankhara. And I don't know, personally, I'm not entirely, to me, all conditions doesn't quite speak to me. To me, a condition is like a bit like a cause, or a bit like something which engenders something else. So I would have preferred something like all phenomena without a qualification. To me, that is more easy to understand. So just to kind of let you know an alternative way of translating this. So establish a perception of impermanence in all phenomena without qualification. In other words, without exemptions, without anything apart. Everything is included. Everything in the world is basically included in sankhara. The only exception is nibbana, because nibbana is not a phenomenon. Nibbana is just the ending of something, and so that's why it is not included in this. So what about this word impermanence? What does it really mean? Anicca. And sometimes, to me, the English word impermanence is not it doesn't really grab you very much. Something's impermanent, I think you shrug your shoulders, whatever, no, what's the big deal, it's impermanent. And of course, it is a big deal, that's the whole point. And so there are different ways of translating this. And one of the ways, the more you know the suttas, the more you know how words are used in different contexts, the more you start to grasp what kind of is the purpose of this. And nicca, for example, is used, the opposite of anicca is nicca. Nicca, then, if anicca means impermanence, then nicca means permanence. But nicca is used, for example, when you go to a meal at a designated house, let's say every week. That is called a nicca bhatta. And you can't translate that as a permanent meal. That doesn't make any sense. But you can translate it as a regular meal because you go there every week. And so Nitya means that which is regular, that which is reliable, that which kind of you can trust. Whereas anicca is that which is unreliable, irregular, uncertain, or impermanent, if you like. So it has this sense of something that you cannot rely on in this world. And of course, that is really problematic because we want to rely on things. This is kind of one of our basic desires, is to be able to have things when we want them, and to rely on, the things that we are attached to be there when the desire for those attachments arises. And so this is problematic, to rely on something that is inherently unreliable. That is a recipe for dukkha and for suffering, obviously. So, seeing six benefits, you start to establish the perception of impermanence or unreliability in all phenomena. No qualifications, no exemptions from that. So what are these six? And the six benefits: all phenomena will appear to me as transient. So that this is a benefit. It may sound strange, but this is one of the benefits, is that all phenomena will appear to you as transient. And so this relies on the fact that you have faith. You have faith and confidence in the Dhamma. So you know that this is the Buddha, the way the Buddha teaches his Dhamma. And so because you are confident in that, you want to develop your mind in that direction, even if you may not know this. And again, it speaks to the importance of faith and confidence. Without that faith and confidence, you may say, well, why should I do this? This doesn't make any sense. This sounds like suffering. Without, what are the benefits of this? And so again, faith and confidence is what makes you do this simple thing. The Buddha says things are impermanent. Must be true. The Buddha says it. Why would I doubt it? The Buddha, the greatest teacher in human history. I'm listening to my primary school teacher, for goodness sake. If I listen to him, I should certainly listen to the Buddha more than that blooming primary school teacher. This is kind of how you think about it. Actually, the Buddha, we don't fully understand how the Buddha stands head and shoulders above everyone else. And if this is what the Buddha says, okay, and this obviously is one of the teachings of the Buddha. Sabbe sankhara anicca is like everywhere. It's kind of one of the foundational teachings of the Dhamma. And so, yes, okay, I will go that way. And we know, of course, that it is largely true. If you look at the world, it's very hard to see anything that is not transient. Everything is always changing, whether it's outside of you or inside of you. You can't really grasp anything that, which looks permanent. The sense of self is there, but it's kind of very hard to know exactly what it relates to sometimes, because everything seems a bit sort of out of control. So you kind of know it is true, but on the other hand, you don't know it is true. This is kind of the weird thing about the Dhamma. You sort of get what the Buddha is getting at, but not really deeply enough. And because it isn't deep enough, you need to develop this perception to allow it to sink in, so you can see it in a deeper way. And then you can attune to the way the Buddha taught things in his Dhamma. That is kind of the issue here. So you attune more and more and more. And then gradually this amorphous sense that there is permanence in the world, that there are things you can rely on, it becomes more clear how unreliable and dodgy that whole thing is. So sometimes we know things are impermanent, we just don't know how impermanent they are. We don't realize that things can just change so dramatically, so fast. It's like causes and conditions are building up under the surface, waiting to burst forth into impermanence. Cause, the simile I've been using is kind of the simile of an earthquake. Before the earthquake, the tensions build up under the surface in the plates, the various kind of plates in the Earth's crust. They build up, and eventually the tension becomes so strong, it just takes one tiny more condition, and then bang, you have the earthquake. And impermanence is a bit like that. It builds up under the surface, and suddenly one day you just die. Suddenly one day the world suddenly goes in funny directions. You don't know what's really going on. Suddenly things are out of control. And so this is kind of the idea, building up a powerful sense of how impermanent things actually are and how quickly change can happen. Most people, when they die, are surprised. What, is it happening already? I didn't expect this. Almost everyone says that. If someone in the family dies, oh, I didn't expect it. It happened so fast, so suddenly. Yes, that's the point. It happens when it's inconvenient. It happens in the middle of you doing something else. While you're busy mowing the lawn, you die, right? And you think you're going to finish mowing that lawn, but actually not. You're in the middle of things, and suddenly you're gone. It's the most... Dying is like the most mundane thing. It just, bang, that's it, you're finished. And we don't think like that. We think of death as, okay, it happens, in a fairly regular way. Yeah, okay, at least I have to be 80 years old. Yeah, I can't die before you're 80. Of course you can die before you're 80. Get real. Yeah. And so all of these things, yeah, and so this is what it means to understand impermanence. It does not happen the way we think it's going to happen. Yeah, things are just fundamentally unreliable, and so we need to reflect on this to make it real in this particular way. All phenomena will appear to me as transient. That means you will stop attaching to things in quite the same way. It means your desires will become less, your ill will will become less, etc. All of these things will kind of gradually come together here. My mind, the second one, my mind will not delight anywhere in the world. Samba loke, my mind, mano, nabbiramisati. My mind will not delight in anything, or my mind will not delight in the whole world. Sabba loka is the Pali word there. Yeah, there's nothing in the world that seems interesting. Very often when you see the word sabba loka, the word loka can have many different meanings, but one of the core meanings of loka that I mentioned before is the idea of the five sense world. That actually means the five sense world. Then you can expand it to include the rupa loka of the mind and the arupa loka, but essentially very often it refers to the five sense world, and that is why you have the lokassa anta. Lokassa anta is the end of the world. Yeah, and that end of the world is what happens when you go into the first jhana. That's the end of the world. That's obviously the five sense world, and not the world in the larger sense or a broader sense. That's what Lokanta Vihara is. It is, yeah, that's kind of where that name comes from. It's like the jhana, it really means like the jhana Vihara, that's what it means. Yeah, it's nice, it's actually a very nice name for a Vihara. And it kind of... So the main meaning of this, you don't delight anywhere in the world, means you don't delight in anything in the five sense world, because you understand that is fundamentally impermanent, fundamentally problematic. There's nothing there to hold on to, and so you let that go. And so it happens, in one sense, the contemplation of anicca happens according to a certain pattern, a certain sequence. And the most basic one is the sequence of understanding the five sense world. Yeah, we start with that because that is what allows us to access samadhi. That is the first place where we understand impermanence properly. It's important to do these things in the right way, not to start with seeing the impermanence of the five khandas right away because it's too profound. We're starting with the five sense world, looking around you, seeing what the world is like, yeah, getting a feeling for that. That's where it begins. And then once you see that fully, the impermanence of the five sense world and how there really is nothing there to hold on to, then samadhi becomes possible. And when samadhi is possible, that is when you can see the five khandas are as empty or impermanent. That is where you have insight into non-self, yeah, because that is the time for that. So the sequence here is really important. So know why you are contemplating impermanence. So even, let's say you do some kind of vipassana technique. So if you're doing a vipassana technique and observing the feelings or the sensations in the body and how they always change, initially, even that should not be about profound insight into non-self. That too should be for the purpose of samadhi, for letting go of the five sense world. Then later on, when that samadhi has been achieved, then you take that deeper and it becomes something that you understand non-self through her. So the sequence here is important. You have to do things in the right way. The most basic things, then the medium things, then the profound things, one after the other here. So you do not delight anywhere in the world. My mind will rise above the whole world. So this is, again, the whole world. Mostly here refers to the five sense world. So your mind will rise above the five sense world. It's like it will elevate itself. It becomes light. It rises up to that famous mountaintop. It climbs to the mountaintop, and when it is at the mountaintop, it looks down and it understands the five sense world in front of it. The mountaintop simile is very common. It's used in the suttas specifically for this purpose. You climb the mountain of samadhi. Then when you get there, the five hindrances are like below you. Then you get a bird's eye view of what the five sense world is like. You can only understand it when you extract the mind from the five sense world. That's when you can understand that world. It's a very important point. And it's like the famous simile of the tadpole and the frog, right? If you are in the water, you cannot know water because water is always around you. You don't have any comparison. There's no way of understanding it. When the tadpole becomes a frog, jumps out of the water, aha, now I know what water is. I don't think the frogs think that, but anyway, they could have thought that if they were a bit smarter here. So that now you know what water is because you're out of it for the first time. You're out of the five sense world for the first time. Now you understand what it means. Prior to that, you don't really fully understand. And so this is another reason why the jhanas are so important, because they allow you insight into things, full, complete insight into something that otherwise you can't really get it properly. You are fully withdrawn from the five sense world. So again, jhanas and insight, you can't really separate them. Samadhi and insight always has to go together here. So you rise above that world, standing on the mountaintop, understanding what is going on. Vutta hissati is the Pali word. It is related to the word for the ordination of nuns. The word for an ordination of a bhikkhuni is different from the word for an ordination of a monk. Ordained a monk is called upasampada or upasampadeti. For nuns it's called vuttapana. And vuttapana is the same kind of word that you find here. It means to elevate someone. You elevate them to the station of a bhikkhuni. You kind of pick someone out of the ordinary world and bang, now you're a bhikkhuni. And here is the same kind of thing. You elevate the mind. You make it more pure. You put it on a higher level. You make the mind beautiful, powerful, blissful at the same time, elevating it out of that world, lifting it out of the five sense realm. This is the idea of rising out of, rise above the whole world in this sense. You could take this further, because again, the whole world here, first of all, it means the five senses, but then also beyond that, it means more. It also means the world of the samadhi and everything down the track, the world of I and all of that sort of stuff. So eventually it means all of that as well. Then we have my mind will incline to extinguishment. It will incline to nibbana. The mind, when you see everything is impermanent, it will incline to nibbana. Why? Because there's nothing worth holding on to in the world. Everything is impermanent. The moment you hold on to anything, you know you're asking for dukkha. You are saying, please, give me dukkha. That's what you're saying, essentially, because it is unreliable. Can't hold on to it. And so you, instead of saying, please give me dukkha, you say, okay, let me go to nibbana. All of these things need to be extinguished because there's nothing worth holding on to here. And so you don't hold on to anything. The mind is extinguished. Certainly the defilements that cling to things in the world, they certainly become extinguished. You let those go. So, so it is very profound, and it's kind of nice because it's just a simple idea. Impermanence, unreliability, it's easy to understand what is going on. At the same time, very profound. These are often the best kind of teachings, are the ones that are simple yet profound at the same time, because it means we can relate to them, we can use them, and yet they lead us all the way to awakening, etc. My fetters will be given up. The fetters that tie us to existence. These fetters are things, again, for example, you have the kamma sankhara. Sankhara is the word for fetter here. And the kamma sankhara, you're fettered to sensual things. And again, those fetters become stupid once you understand that karma is unreliable. And so you have all of these different sankhyojanas, all of these things that fetter you to the world, and you don't want to be fettered to anything, because all the things you are fettered to are impermanent. And you realize it's crazy to be fettered to impermanent things, and so you give up those fetters. Yeah, it's like defilements in the previous one. Here are the fetters, or the ties, the bonds, the ropes. The word fetter is not a very common word, but it means like something that ties you down, like a ball and chain or something like that, is the kind of the fetters of the world. So your fetters will be given up. That sounds kind of nice. Yeah, who wants to be fettered? Fettered means ball and chain. It's the old way of imprisoning people in the old days. Yeah, you kind of get this, I don't know if you read the, what was that? That was some kind of cartoons, and they had these fetters with ball and chain around their legs. Was it Tintin or something like that? Or no, maybe it was Lucky Luke, one of these kind of French cartoons. I don't know if you're ever into French cartoons, but anyway, that's where it was, I think. I think Lucky Luke. You heard about Lucky Luke? He was the one who could draw a gun so fast that it was faster than his own shadow. So you had a picture of him, it was like this, and he'd draw, and the shadow was still kind of down like this. And he was anyway, so that's where I grew up with ball and chains in that kind of in that area. Well, what is it? No, that's a yoke. Yojana. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Sure. Yes, that's called a yoke in English. It's the same word in English as it is in Pali. So here is sankhara, and that is usually translated as a fetter into English. So sankhara probably a little bit different than yojana, but similar kind of idea. So yes, yeah, yes. Okay, so the fetters will be given up, so those oxen can be free and they can walk wherever they want. That's kind of nice. And I guess we are a bit like those oxen. I will achieve the ultimate goal of the ascetic life. Contemplating anicca is enough to get you to the ultimate goal, the parama atta, I think the Pali word is, parama atta of the ascetic life, the ultimate goal of the ascetic life. Because why? Well, because of all of these other ones here. The fetters will be gone, the extinguishment will be gone. You will achieve the ultimate purpose, the aim of why you become a monastic, or why you became a dedicated lay follower, whatever it might be. You will go all the way to the end. That's good news, I say. Seeing these 6 benefits is quite enough to establish the perception of impermanence or unreliability in all phenomena without qualification. So this is why you should contemplate impermanence or anicca. So what do you think? Is it worth it? Yeah. Okay, good. So I always have to check if the sales work is working or not. So we're testing, see how many people we have buying into this. So that is the thing. And now we have another sutta which talks about the idea of Aniccasaññā with a large number of similes attached to it. And these similes kind of give us an idea of it's kind of, similes are always nice. They kind of make it come alive. It makes it clear what is going on here. So this sutta is from the Khandas-sutta, Srimutta Nikaya 22, the connected discourses, number 102, and it's called the Sutta on the Perception of Impermanence. And so it goes as follows: At Savati, mendicants, when the perception of impermanence is developed and cultivated, it eliminates the desire for sensual pleasures, for rebirth in the realm of luminous form, and for rebirth in a future life. It eliminates all ignorance and eradicates the conceit, I am. So here it starts off by basically saying that, again, the perception of impermanence helps with everything on the path. From the beginning, from the point where you kind of just want to give up the coarser aspects of the mind, all the way to the most refined aspects of wrong view, which is the conceit, I am. Everything is eliminated by the perception of impermanence. So it's incredibly powerful. Yeah, it is something that works all the way through the path. And so this is kind of one of the points. That's why we should start straight from the beginning here. But we should start in the right place, and we should start here, like everything in the suttas. This too is gradual. Yeah, the first thing is the most basic, then it becomes more profound, and even more profound again to the most profound. And so we need to follow the same kind of sequence, because when we do, then it will unfold quite naturally. So we start with sensual pleasures. And what exactly does that mean? And I think it's important to recognize the broadness of attachments that we can have in the world. Yeah, it can be so broad. There's so many different things that we attach to. And I tend to like to think of impermanence, or think of how we reflect on things in kind of with three different ways. First of all, we can think of the world at large and see that as impermanent. Then we can think of our personal world, yeah, of relationships, of the people we know, of the things we own, yeah, the personal realm as impermanent. And finally, you can think of your own five khandas, looking internally as impermanent. Yeah, and these things are not really completely separable. These things overlap to a large extent. Arguably, the five khandas include all the other ones, for example. But you can see why the five khandas ultimately is about insight, done more directly into your own mind and body. And so it's very useful to start with the world at large, yeah, and especially in times like this, when the world seems unstable. Many people are saying that 2025, we don't know what's going to happen. All kind of interesting people becoming presidents and things around the world. And so it's uncertain, and with kind of political instability seems to be a new thing. These strong men I don't think there's many strong women, usually strong men, taking power in various countries and kind of building up and causing alliances between other strong men. And it's kind of, everything is kind of in flux. Yeah, democracy seems to be declining around the world. That's what we're used to. The whole world is kind of unstable. So how do we deal with that? And some people get really upset about this. Yeah, no, it's going the wrong way. What can we do to counter this? And they might get angry because certain people get into power which they think should never get into power. And maybe they see the saber rattling between big nations. And that's kind of scary for Australia. Let's say that the US and China will go to war, for example. What is Australia going to do? Yeah, well, you probably have to side with the US, and you might be at war with China. Gee, that's kind of all very concerning. You don't know what's going to happen. So many things in the world at large that are just out of control. Yeah, and of course it is out of control. No one is really in charge. There is no self. Yeah, there aren't any adults in the room, as they say. We're all kind of playing, trying to figure out how to control this world. I sometimes think that, well, actually, all of these leaders in the world, what do they know anyway? Some of them may be very brilliant. Some of them don't seem all that smart at all, to be honest. They seem kind of ordinary. They just have kind of gotten to power for some random reason. And I think basically they are a bit like me. Yeah, okay, these people are a bit like me. And I know if I was in charge of big country, that would be really scary. I wouldn't have a clue what to do, yeah, how to run a big country and how to understand geopolitics and how to avoid wars or whatever, but it would be incredibly difficult to do. But everyone is a bit like that. Everyone is a bit out at sea, yeah, and everything is a bit random. We don't know what is going on. No one is really in charge. That is the reality here. When you grow up, you think your parents are in charge. Yeah, later on, okay, discard the parents. Maybe someone else is in charge. Yeah, eventually you realize no one is in charge. It's just stuff happening. People trying their very best to make things sort out. It's a miracle. It is going as well as it does. That's the miracle, right? Yeah, we're actually able to have some peace and happiness and joy, and we can come here and have a good time together on the retreat. This is kind of, that is to me as the more the miracle. And, so there is something good in human beings. We can cooperate at times. At other times, we cannot cooperate at all. And so this is kind of how you look at the world. So don't be surprised when things are going wrong. Yeah, or maybe they're not going wrong at all. Maybe this is the way it's supposed to be. What is wrong anyway? Wrong is kind of a value judgment. Can we really say it's wrong? It's just going in a certain way. And everything in the world is a bit like that. It doesn't mean we shouldn't try. It means that we understand that in the end, no one is in charge and we don't know what's going to happen. That's what it means. And it is the same with refugees. It is the same with, the drug wars in Mexico. It is the same with the climate and environmental problems that we have in the world. Yeah. In all of these cases, we should do our best. With all of these large things that are going on, we do our best to help out. We do our best by voting for the right people or whatever. But in the end, we don't even know what is right necessarily, what is going to work. And then when it doesn't work, we're not too surprised, because the world, we know deep down, actually things are out of control. And what that does, if you think about these things in the right way, is that you actually drop the world a little bit. You don't worry so much about it. You do what you can, but you don't invest too much energy or too much of yourself into something that is inherently problematic, inherently out of control. If you invest your whole life into being some kind of activist, trying to and I must admit, I have a lot of admiration for people who are activists and who are willing to put their life on the line for something they really believe in. There's something very beautiful about that. Rather than being greedy in the world and destructive, there's something very noble about being an activist if you do it in a good way, the right way, because you really believe in something. But actually, it may not be the best use of your time, because you can be as activist as you like, and still there's absolutely no guarantee that it will have results. The world will still go wrong. And then if you spend all your energy, all your time into trying to build up a world which is inherently problematic, then you will get very disappointed when it doesn't work out. You might get depressed. I don't know what you will do with yourself. You might even get suicidal because the world is not going. If the world is everything you have, and that is your refuge, and that doesn't work out, you have a serious problem. And so when you understand that all of these things are uncertain, and there is nothing we can, in the end of the day, we cannot guarantee any particular outcome, then you let go a little bit. And that is the beginning of the letting go of the sensual realm that is talked about here, understanding the limitations of things. That's kind of a fine balance, doing your bit without really becoming obsessed about it, without expecting an outcome. It is like bringing up children in a really good way. You love them, you do what you can for them, but at the end, it is not. You cannot make your children be in a certain way. You're going to have to accept if they do funny things or things you don't approve of or whatever. This is a hard thing to do, but that is the only way to deal with the world at large, to do it in the right way. So you become less interested in politics. You become less interested in trying to figure everything out, because there is no solution. Ultimately, there is no solution. That is why the world just goes on and on and on, up and down, back and forth, not really getting anywhere. And then you pull back from that. This is like the first level, seeing the world a bit like that. Then you have to do the same thing for your more personal life, your family, your belongings, everything that is kind of more around you. And I've talked about this quite a bit already. We talked about the five sense world before, and that is kind of more in that realm, your personal family realm. But you understand that people will die. You understand that everything that is dear to you must become otherwise. You cannot hold on to anything in the world. Everything will have to go eventually. And you kind of reflect on this again and again and again, making this a strong reflection inside of you, knowing that time is short and at the very latest when you die, which could be at any time, you're going to have to give these things up. Now is the time to give up these things, in the sense of not holding on to them, not making too much out of them, at least reducing your grip a little bit on these things in life. And then you are kind of letting go of this. So that is the five sense realm. And if you can let go of all of that, then basically you have given up the sensual pleasures. But if you want to eliminate the desire for rebirth in the realm of luminous form, this is like the jhana realms, or then you have to go even deeper. And this is where you have to contemplate internally. You have to kind of go into your five khandas, into your mind and body, who you are as a person. And this is what we were looking at when we were looking at the Aniccasannasutta, the sutta on mindfulness of breathing. Yeah, you let go and let go and let go until the mind comes together in samadhi, vimocchayang chittang, yeah, liberating the mind, enter a samadhi, and then you do the aniccanupassi, viraganupassi, nirodhanupassi, patinisagganupassi, the contemplations of impermanence afterwards. So you have already given up the five sense world. That is what that first part is about, taking you all the way to the jhanas. Yeah, giving up the perception of your body is part of that. Letting go of all the five senses is part of that. The ultimate thing, and this is kind of why, and one of the reasons why the jhanas take time to achieve, and not difficult, it just takes time, you have to get used to it, is that not only are you giving up the objects of the five sense world, you are actually giving up the five senses themselves. You are saying, okay, I'm happy to be blind. Why? Because there's nothing in that world which is interesting. That is what you're doing in a sense, because the moment you enter a jhana, you can no longer access the five senses. So it feels like you are giving them up completely. That's why why it is very tricky and why it is a very profound act of renunciation to enter the jhanas. You're happy to go deaf. You're happy to give up touch, everything. You kind of let it go so you can experience a much higher bliss instead. And so it's a very profound thing to understand the impermanence of the five sense world. Taken to its logical conclusion, it means giving up the five senses altogether, because there's nothing of interest in that world. And then comes the giving up of the jhana realms, and this is now it gets getting very, very profound. And this is where, after you enter the jhanas, you look at what remains. At that point, there's very, very little that remains. I mentioned this a few times already now. There's bliss, and there is bliss and kind of unification of the mind, and that's pretty much it. There's much more going on, a little bit of movement in the first jhana. And now you have to contemplate that tiny slither of existence that remains at this point. You contemplate that, and you see that also as anicca, as impermanent. Why is it impermanent? Well, first of all, you experience entering the jhana and coming out, so that kind of makes it clear that it is impermanent. Secondly, you know that it is produced through volition. You direct your mind towards the jhana, so it is volitionally produced. Anything that is produced by an act of will must be impermanent, because that act of will has a limited kind of lifetime. It's like anything in life. When you create something through an act of will, it has a certain lifetime before it expires. So you create a thought through an act of will, that thought only lasts so long. And even things you create in the world, they also only last so long. Everything created by the will has a use-by date when it comes to an end. So you know the jhanas are this sort of thing. When the will stops, the jhana stops. And so then you start to get insight into the jhanas themselves. Now this is where the Aniccasana is becoming really, really profound. The hard part, the main work that we have to do is to give up the five senses and the five sense world. That is the really, really difficult thing, because we are so incredibly immersed in the five sense world. The five sense world is everything for us. Right now, you hear, you see, and that's pretty much the five sense world. The moment you wake up in the morning to the time you go to bed at night, it's almost five sense world all the way through. You dream about the five sense world. How often do you dream about jhana? Rarely, right? If you do dream about meditation, congratulations. I'll be very, very impressed with you. There are some people who have like spiritual dreams, but it's quite rare. My favorite spiritual dream, again, as Ajahn Brahm tells me all of these stories, Ajahn Brahm stories. The story where he tells me that he was dreaming, and in this dream, he was bowing down to this famous monk that he knew in Thailand. He had a lot of confidence in this monk. So as he's bowing down to this monk, in the dream, the bliss is so powerful, right? The bliss is so strong, and you cannot dream, you cannot sleep anymore when the bliss becomes so strong. So he comes out of his dream, sits up, and goes straight into this profound meditation experience. It's kind of cool, isn't it? This is kind of a spiritual dream, right? You're dreaming essentially about meditation, and the mind is so bright that you wake up and you kind of enter deep samadhi. This is what the really cool people in the world do. Cool in the higher sense of the word. And so that is where our work is to overcome this world, because this is we are so stuck. It's like treacle, the world of the five senses. It's like a swamp. This is one of the similes used in the suttas for the five sense world. You're stuck in this swamp. You try it, and it kind of stretches in kilometers, tens of kilometers in all directions, and you have to trudge through it. You have to kind of pull out your legs because it's like treacle. You're stuck in this swamp, and so eventually you kind of untangle yourself from all of this. And one of the main ways of doing that untanglement is the perception of impermanence. There is nothing in that world worth holding on to. And gradually, the mind kind of emerges step by step, gradually lifting itself out of that five sense world, until one day your mind changes completely, and you enter that state of samadhi where the whole world is gone completely. That is what we're aiming for. This is the hardest work on the spiritual path. Once you emerge from that, once you have had even just one taste of real samadhi, it changes your attitude completely, because then you have the insight, you have the wisdom to know where happiness lies. And then the path is so much easier and so much happier from there on. So that's why very often when we talk about the asavas, there's two main asavas, and the two main ones are the kamma asava and the bhava asava. Asava, the outflowing of sensuality or sensual desires, and the asava of desire to exist. These are the two main asavas, And the first asava, the desire of sensual desire, is the one that it takes the most work to get out of. Once you're out of that, then all that remains is this desire to exist, which very often comes from the mind. The enjoyment of the jhanas and these things, of course, it's very attractive. And if you think you can exist there, well, you will exist there. There's a tiny thing called bhava asava left. And these are the two things that tie us to existence. There's also the avijja asava, but as I mentioned before, it is very small, and there isn't much left really after kamma asava and bhava asava. So it kind of almost falls by the wayside. There's also the ditta asava, but the ditta asava also is kind of somehow falls by the wayside because it is often included in bhava asava. Because if you have an asava or a defilement that you want to exist, that defilement is what tends to give rise to views and things. So it's encompassed by the other ones. So the two main ones, kamma asava, bhava asava, these are the two things to focus on. So, I'll take some questions later on if it's okay here. So, so that is the realm of luminous form, which is the Madhusudato's translation of the jhana world. And then you have, for any kind of rebirth in the future life, is eliminated so you have no desire for future anymore, for rebirth anymore, because you have seen that everything is impermanent, absolutely everything, even the rebirth in the immaterial realms is impermanent. Nothing can be held on to. So eventually, no more rebirth at all. All rebirth is eliminated by this perception. And finally, the very last thing, it eliminates all ignorance, which could here also be, for example, the ignorance related to wanting to annihilate yourself. This is another kind of tanha or craving. And finally, it eradicates all conceit, I am. All conceit, I am, because if everything is impermanent, then the whole idea of I am makes no sense anymore. You see that everything within you is just a changing, whole changing thing, phenomena changing all the time. There's nothing inside of you that can be held on to as the real me. I love this idea, the conceit I am. In Buddhism, I am is a kind of conceit. And it's kind of extraordinary because that's not how people usually think of the idea I am. A conceit means I am better, or In Buddhism, we also have the inferiority conceit, I am worse, and we have the equality conceit. Yeah, it's called the, what's it called again? It's called the Vidda. The conceit is called the Vidda in that case. So the equality conceit is Hina. Anyway, whatever. So it is a, yeah, so you have these conceits, and all of these things are related to the idea, and ultimately the final conceit is the conceit I am. Yeah, this is a conceit. And it's very interesting because it is very different from almost any other spiritual system where people talk about I am this, I am that, etc. Actually, I am that is already way down the road in terms of conceits. Even I am is a conceit, let alone I am that. That is a real conceit. That is kind of, you're really in trouble if you think I am that. And so these are the, so this is, yes, I am. In other words, you're already buying into the idea that there's something that actually is not impermanent or unreliable. And so the very conceit, I am, is gone. And that is kind of the end of ignorance, the end of the path. The first factor of dependent origination has been overturned. Now there's no more avidya. Avidya nirodha, sankhara nirodho. From the ending of avidya is the ending of sankharas, and all the way to dukkha at the end of the 12 factors of dependent cessation. So this is what we are trying to do here. This is the development of the perception of impermanence, yeah, in all of these various areas. But please start with the basic ones. Think every time there is something that upsets you in the world, or upsets you in your personal life, that you think is difficult to deal with, that you get angry about, or you sorrow over, it means that you're holding on to something, and you haven't really accepted it as impermanent. So every time there is an upset, every time there is a sadness or whatever, it is an opportunity to learn, opportunity to grow in wisdom. If we take every difficulty in our life as an opportunity to grow in wisdom, wow, we're going to grow really fast. There are many, many such opportunities. Yeah, they come all the time. And so please take them. And as you take them, difficulties in life, then you turn them into something positive, and then they don't seem so terrible anymore. So let us now look at the similes. That's kind of just the background information. Let's have a quick look at these similes here. So in the autumn, a farmer plowing with a large plowshare, with a large plow shears through all the root networks. In the same way, when the perception of impermanence is developed and cultivated, it does all of these things we just talked about, ultimately leading to the eradication of all conceit I am. Yeah, it shears through all the root networks. In other words, there's no root, there is no tiny, miny little root left from which that plant or whatever it is can sprout again in the future. Everything is cut off. The last little rootlet has been pulled out and eliminated. There's nothing more that can grow anywhere, and that is why you have reached the end of the path. Nothing more can spring out of this. No future rebirth, no more I am, no more nonsense. It doesn't say that in the suttas, the I am nonsense, but maybe it should say that. I think there's a potential sub-commentary there somewhere. I shouldn't say that, it's too dangerous to say it, because someone will take it up and actually write a sub-commentary about these things. Okay, a reed cutter, having cut the reeds, grabs them at the top and shakes them down, shakes them about, and shakes them off. In the same way, when the perception of impermanence is developed, it eradicates all conceit I am. Reed cutter, he shakes the reeds. Does anyone understand that simile? No? I don't understand it either. I'm not sure what it means. Does it mean that you are shaking the roots? It doesn't sound like it, because you're grabbing them, you cut them, and if you shake the roots, maybe you get all the earth off. I don't understand that simile here. My apologies. Let's go on to the next one here. with the stalk of a bunch, when the stalk of a bunch of mangoes is cut, all the mangoes attached to the stalk will follow along. In the same way, when the perception of impermanence is developed, it eradicates all conceit I am. Yeah, so you cut, again, this is like cutting the root or cutting the bases. So everything which is higher or lower down on that branch will follow along. So here all the mangoes, in the last simile the mangoes were something nice, in this simile the mangoes are all the stuff you want to get rid of. So they all kind of go as a consequence. The rafters of a bungalow all lean to the peak, slow to the peak, and meet at the peak. So the peak is said to be the topmost of them all. In the same way, when the perception of impermanence is developed, it eradicates all conceit I am. And this is a beautiful simile, the idea that the Aniccasaññā is the most powerful perception you can develop. All the other perceptions come along with that understanding, with that insight. Just like the peak, is the main thing that holds the whole house, the whole bungalow together, the roof. In the same way, the thing that holds all the other perceptions together is the perception of impermanence. It means you understand dukkha. It means you understand non-self. It means you understand the perception of abandoning. It means you understand the giving up of the sensual pleasure. All of these things come together in this perception. It is kind of all-encompassing, and everything else tends to follow along that perception. Of all kinds of fragrant root, the spikenard is said to be the best. In the same way, when the perception of impermanence is developed, it eradicates all conceit I am. The spikenard. Does anyone know about spikenards? Okay, it's one of these plants. I've heard about it, but only because I've translated sutta. That's the only reason I heard about the spikenard. I looked it up. It said this is the English word for it, but okay. So it's obviously a fragrant root. So it is the best kind of fragrance, is the Aniccasaññā, because it is superior in terms of developing the mind to everything else. Pali word is let's have a look. No, mulaganda means root fragrance. You have the... So it must be something related to mulaganda. Just next to it. Maybe. Yeah, that sounds about right to me, what you're saying there, but I was going to see it for myself, so I can see it. Yeah, kala nusari, that's right. So like kala nusari is the word for spikenard, Pali word. So, yeah, I'm not sure if that helps anyone, but anyway, there you are. Okay. Of all kinds of fragrant heartwood, red sandalwood is said to be the best. In the same way, when perception of impermanence is developed, it eradicates all conceit I am. Yeah, the Buddha is really praising the perception of impermanence here. He does not do that in the same way with any other perception. So it kind of really lifting it up and makes it special. Of all kinds of fragrant flower, jasmine is said to be the best. Well, we all know that. In the same way, when the perception of impermanence is developed, it eradicates all conceit, I am. All lesser kings are vassals of the wheel-turning monarch. So the wheel-turning monarch is said to be the foremost of them all. In the same way, when the perception of impermanence is developed, it eradicates all conceit, I am. So it is the king of perceptions, the main perception. All other perceptions are like little princes in comparison, and they follow along the main king when the main king sort of clarifies and sees things clearly. The radiance of all stars is not worth a 16th part of the moon's radiance. So the moon's radiance is said to be the best of them all. In the same way, when the perception of impermanence is developed, it eradicates all conceit I am. After the rainy season, the sky is clear and cloudless, and when the sun rises, it dispels all the darkness from the sky as it shines and glows and radiates. In the same way, when the perception of impermanence is developed and cultivated, it eliminates all desire for sensual pleasures, for rebirth in the realm of luminous form, for rebirth in a future life. It eliminates all ignorance and eradicates all conceit I am. It's kind of beautiful, isn't it? It dispels all the darkness, the perception of impermanence. It shines and glows and radiates like the sun. It's kind of you get this feeling of the light being turned on in the mind. Now I understand. Of course, it's all impermanent. Why am I holding on to this? Hooray for giving up and eradicating and letting go. This leads to real happiness. Now I can enter the jhanas. I'm not holding on to these things anymore. You feel this sun nimitta arising in your mind. And through that sun nimitta, you then enter the jhanas as a consequence. Because you understand all of these things. And then comes the very last part. And how is the perception of impermanence developed and cultivated so that it eradicates all conceit I am and all of these other things? Well, this is how you do it. Such is form. Such is the origin of form. Such is the ending of form. Such are feelings, or such is perception. Such are choices. Such is consciousness. Such is the origin of consciousness. Such is the ending of consciousness. So you understand the 5 khandas. And in a kind of strange way, all of the things I mentioned before about the impermanence in the world and unreliability in the world, the politics, the climate change, the refugee crisis, the tsunamis, whatever it is that you have, all of these things are strangely included in the 5 khandas. Why? Because it is our perception of that world that matters to us. And all perceptions are individual. They reside in individual beings. Is there any neutral world out there apart from our perceptions? Well, whatever, it's kind of irrelevant. It is our perception of the world that matters. That is where dukkha is found. That is where the problem is found. And so, in a sense, everything is resolved by understanding the 5 khandas. We start by looking at the world because it is important to start in a simple place, understanding our life in this world and how everything is unreliable. But ultimately, it is all resolved by understanding the 5 khandas, by contemplating the 5 khandas. How do we do that? Well, now we're back to the Aniccasannasutta again. We're coming to the end of the retreat. It's time to go full circle and come back to the beginning, maybe. Maybe not. Not quite the beginning. We're seeing the beginning in a new light because we've been through all of this other stuff. But coming back to the Aniccasannasutta, we come back to the very end, where you have Aniccasaññāsutta, Viraga-nupassi, Nirodha-nupassi, Patanissagga-nupassi. That is what this is about, That is the contemplation of the 5 khandas. When you go through the process of watching the breath, you become peaceful and quiet, and then you understand that process through the filter of the 3 characteristics, specifically the 5 khanda and the 5 khandas in this way, the arising and passing away, that is impermanence, and from that also dukkha and non-self. So this is what is going on here. This is how you contemplate the 5 khandas. Often you are asked this question, how do we contemplate the 5 khandas? The Buddha says, contemplate the 5 khandas. It's like this, it arises like that, it passes away. So how do we do that? Well, you can sort of contemplate it directly, but it's much more useful to have a proper framework like Anapanasati, where you actually you observe the breath, you observe things passing away, you observe the body disappearing, the 5 senses, and as you do that, you have some very clear things you can focus on. What is truly impermanent, etc., etc. So this is the way to do that. That is what Satipatthana comes down to. That is how the perception of impermanence is developed and cultivated, so that it eliminates all desire for sensual pleasures, for for rebirth in the realm of luminous form, and for rebirth in a future life. That is how it eliminates all ignorance and eradicates all conceit, I am. So that is the perception of impermanence for you, and please make as much out of it as you can, because it is a very powerful perception. And tomorrow morning is the last talk. Tomorrow morning I'm going to focus on the perception of non-self as the last one, and so discuss that a little bit, and it gets really profound, but I think it's also interesting, and someone asked to talk about the Aniccasannasutta, so I may talk a little bit about that as well tomorrow morning. But that is it for now, and now we have a photo session. Yeah? Great. So Deepika, would you please... Yeah. Okay, yeah. Are there people signed up? There are. Okay, in that case we will carry on with interviews. Yeah. So okay, so let's all meet just over here.